Colleagues, it's time for us to get started, and we have already formed a quorum. This is the Finance Committee meeting. We have arranged for 2 sessions to deal with the items on the agenda, and after this session we'll have a break of 10 minutes, and then the second session will start at 5:10. I'd like to remind members that if there is any direct or indirect pecuniary interest involved, then in accordance with Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure, members are required to disclose the nature of that interest before you speak. I'd also like to draw members' attention to Rule 84 with regard to the requirements concerning voting where there is direct pecuniary interest. At the last meeting, some members suggested that we should reshuffle the items on the agenda in order to allow members to discuss items that would be less controversial and that are related to people's livelihood. Subsequently, I received a letter from Mr. Peter Cheung for reshuffling the items of discussion at the FC. Afterwards, I've also reflected members' concerns to the administration, and after considering the justifications and comments from different members, and also the administration stance and also the practice of this committee in the past, I've decided not to change the order of the items on the agenda. That's why I will chair the meeting in accordance with the decided or finalized agenda. With regard to the letter from Mr. Peter Cheung and my reply, and also the administration's response, I've already forwarded that to members under paper FC 20/14-15. We will now continue with our discussion on FCR 2014-15-49 with regard to organic waste treatment facility. That's in paper FCR 2014-15-49. To answer members' questions, we have the Bureau Director, Mr. Wong Kem Sing, and Mr. Edward Chen, Mr. Deputy Director for the Environment, and also Mr. Awai Kwong. At the meeting held on the 17th of October, 20 members have spoken. One has spoken for 2 times, and on the list we have 7 more members who would like to speak, and these members, in accordance of the order they indicated, speaking for the first time we have Mr. Leung Yiu Chung, speaking for the second time Albert Chan, KK Fong, Wu Chi Wai, Peter Cheung, Chen Yun Han, and Kenneth Chan. Mr. Leung Yiu Chung. I don't have anything to say for the time being, Chairman. You have 4 minutes. I have nothing to say. All right, next, Albert Chan. Thank you, Chairman. With regard to the whole scheme, at the last meeting and in the paper, the administration told us a lot about the background to this. I think what's more controversial is about the design. That is, if you look at the current situation concerning the use of food waste, is that reasonable and appropriate? Because there are different ways you can turn waste to energy. You can also use it as fish feed. You can also use it for compost in irrigation and planting. But then apparently you said that that would be used for energy and also for compost. And the administration said that they had taken reference from the practice in the UK. But then in the UK, their practice is very different, because in their case, the administration did not have to fund it, and it's done in the private sector, including the construction of the generation facility or the composting plant or the recovery or recycling plant. So that's done in the private sector, from the construction to the management and everything. So in the UK, that's Lobsell B mine plant. That's the plant in the UK. Well, in Hong Kong, that's very costly, but then in the UK, they only spent $300 million. So that's a direct investment by the private sector. And if you look at the amount to be dealt with in Hong Kong, it's about 70,000, and then in the UK it's 60,000, and then in terms of the composting storage it's about 7,000, but then in the UK it's 30,000. 30,000 tons. So is 4 times. And also in terms of the power generation, we're talking about 3,500 in the UK, and then in Hong Kong it's just 3,000. So the productivity is low, but then the cost is high. So apparently you're telling us that you've taken reference from other people's practice. But then what's worse is that you try to copy whatever you want, but then you're only copying the bad side, but not the good side, because in their case it's investment by the private sector, and then in Hong Kong, well, everything that you can spend using public money, you just do it, and then there is no mentioning of any under the table deal or any interest behind and so on. But then with regard to the design, well, some people might be manipulating it. Some people might also have other secret deals, and also they might be making profit for themselves. And then it will be very difficult to investigate afterwards. It's like what happened to C.Y. Leung and Paul Chan. So many people say that whoever is in power, they will be able to make profit for themselves. C.Y. Leung has made $50 million for himself, so nobody would know whether or not somebody else would be making tens of millions of dollars in this case. All right, Albert Chan, you will have to leave it to the next round before the administration can respond to you. Next, KK Fong, he's not here, then Wu Chi Wai. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to follow up on a point made in the paper. It's about the food waste plant. Well, if you look at the breakdown in cost, you have the facility itself and also the food waste processing part. So there are 2 separate costs. So apparently they have some initial very primitive building, but then according to the estimated cost, for the construction cost, it will go up to over $400 million. So that's $473 million for architectural building and landscape works. So how come it's just a 1-story cottage-like building and it's just a shell? How come it's so costly? $473 million when compared to the entire plant. The cost would be very similar. So I'd like to understand a bit more. Can you give us more detail as to why this is so costly? And also, for the detailed breakdowns, including, well, you talk about architectural building and landscaping. So can you tell us the relevant breakdown? Because in Shield Hole 1, yes, you can beautify the structure, but then is it necessary? Because if it takes up too much of the construction cost, then would it be necessary? So can you tell us more? Bureau Director. Well, Chairman, let me explain. Well, for the facility to be built, according to our feasibility study, it has to be fully enclosed, including the recovery of waste, sorting, and also bio or digestion or anaerobic digesting and so on. So everything will have to be done in a fully enclosed environment, and also we have to have a negative pressure chambers for that. And therefore, if you look at the gross floor area, is 25,000 square meters. And if you look at the per square meter construction cost, is about $18,700 per square meter. So basically, that unit cost is comparable to any government construction cost. And if you look at government project per square meter construction cost, normally it would exceed 19,000. Sometimes it's over 20,000. And when compared to the private sector, industrial type building is comparable, about 17,000 to 21,000. So our cost is comparable to other government or public works projects. And also for the 4 types of construction is the roof and also the foundation is 50%, so it's $223 million. And then for the other construction and fitting out is $93 million. And then for the other building facilities or building services is about $140 million. And also for landscaping is $60 million. So altogether is $473 million. Thank you. KK Fong, he's not here. Peter Cheung is not here. Next, Kenneth Chen. How many minutes? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Thank you for reminding. Well, I'd like to go back to the question that I asked last time. It's about the contractor who will be charging us some $70 million every year. That will be from the public coffer. Well, last time I scared myself when I said that it was 70 or $700 billion. Well, we've been seeing leakage in the sewage plant and so on. And of course, for the administration, we would criticize them for being slow. It would only act after something untoward has happened. And then they would come back to this council for further discussion. But then after discussion, the only thing that they could do was to seek claims by instituting litigation. And of course, we have no qualms about this because where there are inadequacies, of course, you will have to go through the proper channels to put things right. But then how are we going to learn from this lesson in order to ensure that when it comes to the performance of the contractor, we'll be able to monitor the performance and also to ensure that we do not have to go to the court again. So with regard to the $70 million operating cost, would there be mechanism to say reduce the cost if they are underperforming, or there might be certain indicators to show that if they have breached the requirements or if they have broken the contract, then we would be able to deal with that properly. So in signing any agreement or contract with regard to design, operating and build, then are there any details that could reassure this committee and the public that when we go for this very costly treatment plant, all right, it's very costly, but then once it's completed, it will not be very costly and yet not efficient. So when we have to go after the liability, we will still be able to do so properly. Yes, Mr. Au. Thank you. In fact, we have already made it clear in a contract that the contractor will have to follow all the related legislation. And also in terms of the construction and operation, he will have the contractor will have to meet all our requirements before he will be awarded the contract. And also, other than the EPD staff who will be stationed on site, we will also be engaging an independent consultant who will be responsible for monitoring the performance of the contractor. At the same time, the EPD's enforcement arm would also be inspecting the plant to ensure that it will comply with our environmental requirements. And if it's found out that they have failed to meet the requirements, then there are several approaches that we can adopt. One, our enforcement wing's staff, after collecting sufficient evidence, we can take up prosecution in accordance with the related or relevant legislation. And under the contract, if they are not able to meet or fulfill the requirements under the contract, then under the contract, they could also be fined. Next, Raymond Chen. Thank you, Chairman. All right, we're going to spend some $1.6 billion for the first phase of the facility. That's the construction of the hardware. But then I'm concerned that even if we manage to get the funding for the hardware, there would also be huge problems in relation to the software. Well, after the administration's resorting to violence to suppress the umbrella movement, many people have resigned, and as a result, there might have been a collapse in the management. Well, many environmentalists have actually resigned from public office or public service involving environmental protection, for example, the Sustainable Development Council, the Foodways Committee, and so on. So many people have actually resigned, and there are also plans for others to follow their example. So with regard to such facilities with many people resigning, would that affect your roadmap for this? And also, do you have measures to make up for this, or is it that for such advisory bodies they are just window dressing, so even half of the members leave, it will not affect the overall plan for the administration to introduce this foodways and yardways plan for Hong Kong? Bureau Director, with regard to the OWTF, well, concerning the advisory bodies that Mr. Chan just referred to, according to my understanding, they have nothing to do with this facility at all. That's why there would be no implication whatsoever. Anything else? No. Next, Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. How many minutes, Chairman? 3 minutes. in the second round. Thank you. Just now, some members have asked questions, and I am concerned because if the OWTF can also be politicized, and if it's delayed, then this is not going to do good to our community. So I'll be very brief in order to give more time for the administration to respond. Well, technically speaking, I support the proposal to turn food waste into energy. In particular, the composting work and also the recovery of heat and turn it into energy and so on. Can we be given more details with regard to composting, how the compost fertilizer will go, and also for turning waste into energy, how will it be used, and also what kind of facilities will be built, and residents in which district will benefit. All right, on composting. Well, we have this composting processing so that for any residual energy that will be turned into something useful, and for the composting process, we will have to meet the prevailing standards in Hong Kong, and that will produce some 7,000 tons of compost fertilizer, and the requirement in the market is about 20,000 tons, and therefore it should be able to absorb the production. And also at the Kowloon Bay, we have done a pilot project, and it's been used extensively, and for planting, for organic farming and so on, and it's been very popular, and therefore we believe that the market should be able to take it, and we will also be selling it to the private market, and also we will also be producing about 14 million units of energy, and we have sewage plants and also other plants in the nearby area, and these government facilities will be more than willing to use that energy, and for the rest it could also be uploaded to the power generating plant, and we've contacted the power generating plant. Technically it should be feasible, and after we have got the funding, we'll be sorting out the details with the operator. Well, generally speaking, we will be setting aside some 50-60% of the energy for the use by the two government departments, and for the rest it will be used by the power generating plant. Chairman, with regard to the use of food waste, there are many advanced facilities worldwide, and if you're able to recover the resources and turn it into energy, then that would also become a very useful facility, and I will support it. At the EA panel, we hope that more can be built, because one would be too few. Peter Zhang, 3 minutes in the second round. Thank you, Chairman. Well, for the OWTF, obviously that's good for the environment. But then how many such facilities do we need before we can deal with the large amount of food waste? We haven't really touched domestic waste. So how does the administration propose to deal with commercial food waste? And if we only have one such treatment facility, how many jobs can be created so that for the grassroots, they will benefit from this, so that we will not have the impression that the administration would just be awarding the contract to the large consortiums, so that there would be collusion between the government and the business sector, because the administration often gives people this impression. And if the government does not have a long-term plan, and if you just ask us to give you the approval for the first such facility, then that would be very difficult. So we have to know the long-term plan. Yes. Well, in February this year, we have already published a plan. So that's the food waste and yard waste plan for Hong Kong, all the way up to 2022. And if you look at the amount of food waste, it's about 800 to 1,000 tons a year, and some 50-60% of that can be recovered. So we are already talking about some 500-600 tons of commercial food waste, and this facility can deal with 200 tons. So basically, it's from the business sector. And then for the second one, 300 tons in Shaling. So that would also again be dealing with commercial food waste. At the same time, we are also promoting the reduction of wasted source, and through the Foodwise campaign, several hundred establishments have become our partners. We hope to be able to reduce it at source. With regard to the jobs to be created, as you can see from the paper, in the construction phase and also in the operating phase, jobs will be created. Roughly speaking, for jobs during the construction phase is about 514, and then in the operating phase, some 30 plus jobs can be created.
And in fact, later on, other jobs will also be created as well. Any follow-up? Well, if there are just 30 jobs, it will not be enough to go around. And if that's the case, are you going to build more food waste treatment plants? And what about the spin-off on the periphery? If you just create 30-odd jobs, I may not give you my support. A quick one. The spin-off cannot be easily estimated, but there will be some jobs created because, in fact, there will be other trades that will have to complement the work of this OWTF. Mr. Albert Chan, 2 minutes. I'd like to respond to what the administration said. If you look at other people's plan in the UK, they would say 256 jobs would be created during construction. And during operation, the creation of 56 full-time and 50 seasonal jobs. People's figures are clearer. Just now, Mr. Peter Chung asked about the jobs, but I don't think his question has been answered. All in all, I think this plan is immature, and I think we should just suspend the discussion. I am quoting from paragraph 39 of the procedures of the Finance Committee to ask for a suspension or adjournment. I'm proposing an adjournment. Mr. Albert Chan has proposed that there should be an immediate adjournment according to the procedures for Finance Committee. Before I handle that, I will talk about how I'm going to handle this. If you read 39, a member can move without notice on an item for immediate adjournment. I believe when the rule was written, it was not envisaged that there would be more than one meeting on the same day. But as developments have it, the FC now has more sessions than one, and each session would last for more than or just 2 hours. And so we are dealing with the same item during or over different sessions, and there will just be a short break between sessions. If I allow members to move an adjournment during one session, and if it is passed, that session will be over. And of course, if the adjournment is already passed and decided upon, and if the FC can immediately go into another session, which in actuality is a new meeting. Now, I believe that was not the original idea when the rule was written. However, if the adjournment motion is objected to, then the member can move the same motion in the next session, and that will give rise to a very ridiculous situation. And I'm of the view that that was not the original intent of the rule either. To ensure that the FC meeting can proceed in a fair, efficient manner, I am of the view that if there are different sessions dealing with the same item, they should be regarded as the same session. So we can apply Rule 39 of the procedures for the Finance Committee. In other words, if an adjournment motion is passed, I will announce that the meeting for the entire day, regardless of the number of sessions, will be adjourned. But then if the motion is vetoed, members cannot move the same motion in all the sessions on the same day. If the item is not handled or processed during the day, I will allow members to do so again during the next session on the same day only. Mr. Albert Chan. Chairman, 3 minutes for you to speak. Point of order. I need some clarification. I'd like to have some brief clarification. I understand and I may not object to your ruling on the reading of Rule 39, but to enforce the rules, we should go by the same principle. Say if the principle is such that the two sessions are regarded as one, then if a member is asked to be withdrawn from the room because of misconduct, does it mean that the person cannot return during the next session? Well, that is a different matter from Rule 39 on adjournment. Because I might be thrown out by you. Well, if you write in black and white, then I can also respond to you in black and white. Please do not waste time of the Finance Committee meeting. If you have that question, I can respond to you. Mr. Raymond Chan, in fact, my question is similar to Mr. Albert Chan's. In the last session, the chairman said that 2 hours would be regarded as a session, and then if a member is thrown out, that member can return in the next session after a break of 10 minutes. In fact, I do not quibble with what you have decided to do, but would that go against the principle adopted for the last legislative year? Well, because I have to be psychologically prepared. I would have to know this before I would decide on whether I want to argue with you and turn tables with you, so I might be thrown out. Well, let us not destroy any public furniture. Don't turn tables. Let us just deal with Rule 39, all right? Well, maybe you want to get lazy and you want to use that as an excuse and leave for the whole day. But anyway, let us just deal with Rule 39. What you asked will be answered. Mr. Albert Chan, 3 minutes. Chairman, as you know, I have followed environmental issues for many years, and different secretaries for the environment have talked about recycling, separation of waste at source, and we should have mandatory measures to do this, etc., etc. I have said dozens of times in this room and chamber that we have to deal with waste at source. If you do not do it, but if you do whatever is piecemeal today, today you deal with plastic, tomorrow domestic waste, the day after tomorrow industrial waste, etc., you are wasting time and public money. I will deal with that in a moment, and I'm going to talk about the Tuen Mun sludge treatment plant in a moment, because in a way it is linked to this OWTF. You are creating white elephants and wasting public money, just like the food waste problem if you do it territory-wide. Actually, I talked to the secretary in the antechamber yesterday. In fact, this could be linked to the agricultural policy, because food waste can be redeveloped into pig feed. As you know, pigs are costing $3,000 to $5,000 a pickle. And it is so much more expensive now. And now that we have food waste, you can develop the pig husbandry trade so we can have more agricultural activities in Hong Kong. However, you are chopping things up. And I quoted you the UK example. UK used food waste to generate electricity, and the administration didn't even have to fork out 1 penny, but the public are benefited. They do it. They do composting, and that is 4 times what is proposed to be done in Hong Kong. So, Secretary, I don't know whether you are incompetent, or I have heard that EPD officials are standing in the way. That was what the previous secretary said, and there is again such remark. Is it that you cannot direct the EPD? Is it that officials in the EPD have been there for too long, and so they are inert? We don't know about the estimated value of this facility. You are not telling us the whole truth. We are worried about the overall development. If I allow you to do A today, then in fact I will be giving you an easy time. But if you cannot have this facility, perhaps you might be compelled to look at and make a decisive decision on separation of waste at source, so we will not lag behind circumstances and the international community, and we will not waste public money and create unnecessary landfills. I hope you will understand my difficulty, but we don't have many members here. Why don't we just adjourn the meeting? Mr. Raymond Chan. Thank you, Chairman. I speak in support of Mr. Albert Chan's motion for adjourning the meeting under Rule 39. In fact, last week, Mr. Lee Cheuk-yan proposed the same motion, and I supported it then. When the objective environment has not changed, and if any member would ask for an immediate adjournment, I would support it. But when what you said at the outset of the meeting was that you talked to the administration and members that you would stand by the original agenda. Well, I understand people do it for different reasons. They might think if I budge this time and next time if you don't like an item, you would again corner me in the same way. But I'd like to say this, whether it be the pro-establishment camp or the administration, can you not hold out an olive branch and let us deal with uncontroversial or less controversial items first? Let us just go for one or two of those. And for the Finance Committee and for the public's perception of us, why don't you, for example, handle civil service pay rise and also the low-income working family subsidy first? We are talking about very precious time. Why don't you just go for one or two of those? Some members said that they would like to file a new agenda for you, and you might think that that would be asking too much. But I believe members here, no one of them would object to the LIFA or the pay rise for civil servants. You always tell the people in the Occupy movement to go home, and you ask us not to adopt an uncooperative movement in the council. So why don't we do something together to show the public, to show the Occupy movement people that we are also minding about other people's welfare? When you were not the chairman in the last session, you said that the 300 million can already cover what is going to be costing $1.6 billion. That impressed me, and I don't know why from the papers I should be convinced that I should give you $1.6 billion. This morning I was with Mr. James Teen on TV, and in fact the Liberal Party, it was said, would pass the paper. Now maybe Mr. James Teen might not be able to explain to me, but Mr. Chairman, you might want to explain on behalf of the LP. Why would you support the paper? Is it that the administration has already answered all the questions? Mr. Albert Chan's questions has not been answered. Well, even if this will go down the drain, I mean the paper, we would not be wasting money, because we are talking about a difference between $1.6 billion and $300 million. So if there is an adjournment motion, I would support it. Any other member who would like to speak? The administration, would you like to respond? Thank you, Chairman. A brief one. With regard to waste management, including this facility on food waste, we are serious. In last year and this year, we rolled out 2 major plans in order to tackle or manage waste. Now, I won't go into those because I don't want to waste your time. I just like to reiterate that the administration has a comprehensive strategy to tackle and manage waste, and academics, experts, and green groups locally and even overseas experts also identify with those plans, saying that they are comprehensive. If there are no other members who would like to speak, Mr. Albert Chan. Chairman, the Secretary talked about a comprehensive plan and he mentioned experts. But if I understand him correctly, I think that is only about food waste. Well, even if that's not the case, I still cannot see your overall or comprehensive plan. You might have some principles, but how do you mandate separation of waste at source? I cannot see any firm plan. I know you are consulting people. Mr. Bernard Chan also consulted me, but you are talking about a levy, and people are saying if you go for a levy, the war will go on. And this way to tackle food waste is most inappropriate because food waste is actually a very precious resource. You can even make money from it. You are throwing the treasure away and you are asking taxpayers to give you money to subsidy the creation of white elephants. So look at overseas examples. You do not bury yourself in a heap of mistakes just like C.Y. Leung. Wake up. Your officials should tell you to wake up. I ask for a division. Yes, I will now put the motion to the vote. The division bell will ring for 5 minutes.
係啦，我而家攞呢幾分鐘答你，即係唔好嘥大家時間。你要，我可以同你飲杯咖啡。
Well, I will share you with my views. We can have a cup of coffee and we can have dinner, and I can explain to you my views. But fortunately, I don't have the right to vote, and you don't know whether I will support or object.
In fact, I told you why I supported it and how I viewed the figures. I'm very sensitive with figures. It's just like Mr. Wu Chi-wai. He was asking about the few tens of millions of dollars and whether the structure should be so costly. The administration explained their case, and I also said in my paper that if you used your own money, you would watch it closely. But if yes, if it is a private development, people would be watching it. But I have asked the administration to change their mindset. I'm not trying to influence you, but since we are just waiting for the bell, I'm answering the question you asked me. Like to remind members who have just come in, we are now going to take a vote on Mr. Albert Chan's motion moved under Rule 39 or Paragraph 39 of the procedures of the Finance Committee to adjourn this meeting immediately. That is the vote we are going to take.
現在開始表。
Voting begins.
在我宣布
Before I announce the voting results, please check your vote. Voting ends. Display of voting results. 24, 36 against. I announce the motion negatived. Mr. Frederick Fung in his second round, 3 minutes. Chairman, the facility will be able to generate electricity, and the revenue will be handed over to the government. Why don't you consider that the revenue will be sort of used to benefit residents in the neighboring communities? Secretary, there are 2 considerations. Let's look at the practice in advanced cities. In the international community, there's not such a practice of giving the benefits to the neighboring communities. I don't think that should be encouraged. And secondly, in Siuho-wan, as I understand it, within a distance of several kilometers, there aren't any residents. Any follow-up? I would like to follow up on the chairman's remarks made last time. Well, it will be less costly if you don't build in an electricity generation facility, it seems. So can you tell me the cost of using or using food waste recycling to generate electricity? According to our blueprint, and we do it expediently, in an expedient approach, we'll try to make use of the existing infrastructure facilities. For example, for the facility in North District, because there is a town gas facility, so that we would be generating biogas at that plant. So we are adopting a multi-pronged approach, which is in line with international practices. And members are concerned about the cost effectiveness of electricity generation. The cost recovery period is around 10 years. Now, talking about recyclable energy, I think 10 years is a very good figure already. Mr. Frederick Fung. Chairman, the cost recovery period, does it mean that the revenue generated from electricity can make up for the cost of building that electricity plant? Generation plant. Is that right? Yes. Will you be running into a budget overrun? Well, you are talking about budgets here, estimates only, but then up to now, there has been an spending in many infrastructure projects in Hong Kong. So have you provided for that in your proposal? Now, the facility is going to operate for over 10 years, definitely. So I think this is a reasonable return in our understanding. Dr. Kwokaki, first round, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. We all understand that it's important to have food waste recycling, and we agree to this approach. But the question is about the cost. Well, the cost for this OWTF is rather high. So has the government considered some ways? Well, since it's been some time, we had the last discussion, and in the government's response, it says that there is no way to further reduce the cost. 1.5 billion is just about right, or the minimum. How come it is that high? Now, we've been adjourning the Finance Committee for several months, and in this period, has the administration tried to identify ways to lower the cost? Because really, $1.5 billion is a tremendous amount. And for many things that we have to do, like poverty alleviation, the government has said it doesn't have the money. Even if we suggest that we should have more dental service, the government said that doesn't have the money. But then the government is now proposing a project costing $1.5 billion. So in the past several months, the administration, have you done anything to lower the cost? Have you talked to the contractors? Have you talked with people other than the tenderers to see if there a more reasonable cost can be arrived at? Have you gone on that route? Yes, I will try to respond and then ask Mr. Au to supplement. For this Silho 1 OWTF Phase 1, because of the terrain and the site location and also the neighboring facilities, and then we decided on the approach of using the plant for generating electricity. Now, for other locations to be selected for building similar plants, and the government does have the flexibility to look at what the neighboring facilities are to see whether we should generate electricity or we should produce gas. Now, in the second location, Shaling, and also in Taipo, there is also a proposal by a private company to build a sludge treatment plant next to the sludge treatment plant, a food waste recycling facility. Now, we can think of all approaches, consider all approaches, allowing the private sector to participate to lower the amount of public funds required. Second, now if there are gas pipelines in the vicinity of the site, the proposed site, the government can consider, instead of generating electricity, rather generate gas, produce gas. So we can think along those approaches to further lower the cost. So in other proposed locations, we would be having an open attitude on what kind of use will be put to the facility. Well, does it mean that the government has chosen the wrong location? Now, you mentioned about Shaling and also Taipo. So the advantages associated with those sites are not here, present at Silho 1. Well, of course, you can adopt many approaches. Well, if this is a wrong location, shouldn't we stop the project? Now, given the constraints that we are facing, are you thinking of other measures to tackle the problem? Secretary? We have invited very competitive contractors to come and join the bidding and tender. And so we've been able to achieve the best price, I would say. This is a reasonable returned tender amount. At this stage, I don't think we should introduce any changes. Now, for similar projects in the future, we will be open-minded because different locations come with different advantages. Now, for this particular site, there is a water treatment facility, and also the electricity generated can be used by the government facility nearby. So we do have an advantage for that site. Ms. Sit Ho, first round, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. We should have worked on this project earlier because we're keen to go about it. Now, the collection routes and the delivery routes for the food waste. You said that because the food waste can be very obnoxious in a way, so it's best that there is a recycling network within the vicinity of the collection points, and then they can be delivered as speedily to the plant as soon as possible. You mentioned about Chinwan, Shamshepo, and so on, and the food waste will be carried to the facility via highways. But then in our table, in each district, some 1 or 2 estates or shopping arcades are covered. So under your proposal, does it mean that only those 1 or 2 housing estates or shopping plazas are covered in your plan? And for these local communities, do you have facilities to minimize the nuisance when you collect the food waste? And would this food waste be delivered first to the recycling center within that community and then transported quickly via highway to the OWTF? Would you be giving consideration to all these factors as well? Also, I would also like to ask about the question about job opportunities. Will more job opportunities be created? Now, apart from the 30-odd jobs in the proposed facility, in these local communities and in the catering outlets in these communities, what extra job opportunities can be created through these additional establishments or networks? Well, the table lists the partners who have joined the scheme since the food waste recycling scheme since 2012. But the participants are not limited to the list. Now, through extensive promotions, we have promoted food waste recycling through our Food Wise campaign, and many big corporations are participating. Now, if we go by experience, we note that a number of companies or establishments have their own way of collecting food waste. For example, in Chun Mun and Kwun Tong and so on, they do have an established model of how to collect food waste and take them to the appropriate locations. We would strengthen our communication with these establishments in these places, and we would promote our best practice guides and so on. Now, as for job opportunities, it's difficult to estimate, but we can go by experience. Now, every time when we have food waste recycling programs, the shopping arcades have to hire additional manpower, and in housing estates, some workers are hired to collect the food waste. So for catering outlets and shopping arcades, at least several workers can be hired to take part in the food recycling programs. So I think we will create more jobs. Ms. Sit-Ho, apart from Table 2, Discovery Park, Maritime Square, and so on in Chengyi, well, they have their own network, but in Shamshipo Old Districts, there are, say, the Hong Kong style cafes and so on. What do you do about them, these old traditional catering outlets? In the Food Wise campaign, we would be promoting food recycling among Chinese Hong Kong style cafes. Tea cafes. Michael 10, 4 minutes. I'm very sensitive to figures. Now, for many infrastructures projects presented to the Finance Committee, we are concerned about whether they are good value for money. Now, I've never heard many, not heard many opposing views to the project, but people do raise questions on why is the location selected, why is it such costly, and so on. Well, I've been in the business for a long time. There is never an objective standard on what is costly or what is reasonable. And some people may find $1 billion too expensive. Others find it reasonable. So I think that a simple way to do it is to look at international standards. So I have made some calculations myself. The project cost is $1.5 billion over a 10-year period is through $30 million, and recurrent expenditure is $73 million, and then you will be generating 40 million kilowatt kWh of electricity, and you would be saving on that. So the actual cost you are paying is $45 million per year. Now, compared to $30 million in depreciation. So that means you are costing $75 million per year, and divided by 365 days and 200 tons, then that means $1,000 per ton of food waste. So this is these are the figures that I come up with. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Now, what about the international community? Can you give us some figures on the cost for per ton of food waste handled? Well, perhaps I would give you some overseas examples. We are adopting the North American and U.S. standards. One plant of reference is in Barcelona, in Spain. Eco Park number 1. The total handling cost and operating cost is around $1,270 Hong Kong dollars per ton. There is another factory plant in Canada. Startup and operating costs is Hong Kong dollars 1,100 per ton. So it's more or less the figure come up by the member. So is it more or less the same? Yes, more or less. So, Chairman, so how come that the administration is stirring up troubles time and again within LegCo? Now, well, if you said $1.5 billion was the figure 5 years ago, and you're still sticking to that figure this year, then it's no problem. There's no problem with us. But what you're doing is that you raised a sum, and then you raised the proposal of a certain sum, and then 5 years down the road, the figure gets inflated so much. So we are not taking issue with your proposal, but rather the way you calculate your amount. You should make provisions, say, for increased cost, so that we can do our job quicker, and then we can all go home earlier. Next one. Next round, Ms. Sit-Ho. Ms. Dao hasn't answered my question. Well, in old districts, there are Chinese restaurants, Hong Kong-style tea cafes, well, which may be situated on the second and third floor. So how is your recycling network going to be like? How would you be trying to reduce the nuisance cost? Would you be collecting the food waste at regular time, or would you be adding facilities in the rear lanes so that the odor problem can be reduced? So please give us the details, or else in the future you will be just doing it in the major shopping housing estates and major shopping shopping arcades. And actually, food waste, a lot of it comes from the small-sized catering outlets. Second, what kind of vehicles will you be using to collect the food waste? Because you have to cater to the needs of the restaurants, and you can't just dump everything into one tank or what. So you are proposing a sum of $1.58 billion for this project, but you haven't given us the details on how the work process is going to be like. Starting from 2010, we started the partnership program, and we tried to test out the work process at these locations in shopping arcades and small Hong Kong style tea cafes alike.
So we, of course, started that with the larger shopping centers, but then for the smaller eateries, we have also got this arrangement in place. Well, we would use buckets so that at different eateries, after we have collected the waste, then that will be delivered to another location for transportation. And how can we reduce the nuisance? Well, in Hong Kong's case, after the collection, we will transport it away as soon as possible. And we tested that in Kowloon Bay, and that was delivered to the Kowloon Bay plant within the same night. That would also help reduce the nuisance. And after the last few years of trial, we have now come up with a more detailed collection network in order to deal with that in phase 1 of the facility. Ms. Ho, if that is the case, then you will have to forward the information to the EA panel. what you intend to do with the Chin Wan, Kwai Ching, Sham Shui Po, Yau Chi Mong, and Kowloon City. All right. There are 5 districts, so you will have to tell us what kind of network is there for the collection of food waste and how you're able to minimize the nuisance caused to the residents in the neighborhood. And there is bound to be opposition to any facilities in any neighborhood. So you will have to think about it. Well, all the food waste will be directly transported to the Siu Ho Wan facility. There is no need for them to be treated locally within the district. Well, she is asking that the information be passed on to the panel for discussion, and also how many workers will have to be added. So you will also have to tell the ESC, and if you don't have the information with you now, then you should be able to work out the number of additional staff and job types that will have to be created in the future. Mr. Lang Yu Chung, asking in the second round. 3 minutes. Yes, thank you. I'd like to follow up on the point made by Ms. Sit Ho. We have this experience that is very often for shops at grade, they would try to clear the waste within the same night, but then they would be leaving that on the pavement, and as a result that would also cause some nuisance to the district. That would also breed mice and pests and so on. So for Hong Kong style cafes, they would collect the waste and then that would be transported to Siu Ho Wan. In fact, in the process, we would be very concerned as to where you would be collecting the waste. So can you tell us more specifically if they just put it on the pavement or in the planters in the garden or sitting out area? That would also cause some nuisance, and the situation would be far from desirable. So can you tell us more specifically as to where they would be placed before the delivery or the transportation? And also in the first phase, you're talking about 200 tons to be processed and about 50 haul trips will be involved. But then if you look at the forecast or projected population in that area, in fact, the roads there are getting more busy. So what will the transport implications be in the future? All right, you have got this initial plan, but then you have to look at the longer term. So I'm concerned about a possible traffic congestion to be generated. So do you have any TIA, and how are you going to deal with the possible traffic congestion that might be caused? Mr. Au? Well, first of all, the targets will be the larger shopping centers and catering establishments. Of course, we do not rule the possibility of taking on board the smaller eateries. And during the past few years, with our experience under the partnership scheme, for any such plan to be put in place, that will have to be collected at specified time and at specified location, and we will have to use buckets that are fully enclosed, and they will have to be transported away as soon as possible, or else there would be other problem. With regard to the haul trips and also the traffic impact, that would be very minimal, because we're talking about some 50 haul trips and we're talking about 100 for any round trips. And also on any particular section of the road, well, we have done that for Kowloon Bay facility. And if you look at the number of trips and also the traffic during that particular time of the day, is not very heavy. But then in the future, we will come up with more detailed haul trips and planning in order to minimize the impact. Can you be more specific? Well, for the buckets, which will be fully enclosed, all right, you'll be delivering them to the Chinese Hong Kong style cafes, and then they would collect the waste, and then they would be transported to Siu Ho Wan right away. So they would not be stored in a particular location before they are transported. So can you clarify if that is the case? Yes, if there are a couple of them around, then the worker will be using the bucket and he will be going around the restaurants to collect the waste, and then he would carry them right away instead of leaving the bucket there, because that would also cause other problem. So for the existing food waste plant, so you will collect all the waste and then you will sort it after you have collected that back to the plant, or will you be asking the establishments or the eateries to sort the waste first? We will provide guidelines as to how they should sort the waste. So that would be sorted at source. Correct. So that would not be done again at the plant. Well, there would be further screening and sorting at the plant, but then at source, they would be sorted first in order to help people develop this habit of sorting at source. 2 minutes, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you. About the superstructure and its cost. Just now, we were concerned about the construction cost, and we were told that that's comparable to public works project. But then for other government structures, normally they would be multi-story buildings. That's why that would require a more solid foundation. But then after all, we are just talking about a one-story plant, so it's smaller and shorter. So in terms of the foundation work, why does it have to be so costly? And second, you said that for this particular plant, there would be other fitting out costs costing some $100 million. But then in the paper, you said that all the processing facilities and also the anaerobic digesting facility and also composting facilities and so on. So other than these systems, what else would require some $100 million? And also, if that is the case, then you will have to give us a breakdown. For example, if it's a negative pressure room, and it's a specific or special device and so on, you will have to give us the breakdown. But then we haven't seen that. And then for Silho 1, I'm not trying to make life difficult for you, but then at a location where there is nobody nearby, and if you try to landscape it, what kind of work are you going to do? Why does it cost $60 million? Who is going to see it? So can you give us more details? And finally, a more simple question. Well, we may have to wait for the next round before he can answer the questions. Under the plan for the power generating plant, would there be emission or waste gas? Or is it that you would just go for the anaerobic digestion, and then leachate will be produced, and then you would try to turn waste to energy? So 4 questions. You will have to answer that later. Next, Kenneth Chen asking in the third round. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'd like to follow up on my earlier question, but then with limited time, I'll try to give more time to the Deputy Director. It's about the operation of the plant. It's about the KPI, the key performance indicators. And under the agreement, if you have corresponding penalties for the failure to meet certain KPIs, then can you tell us exactly what those penalties are? Because it's hard for me to imagine, all right, if something untoward happens, then what is going to be done about it? And in order to safeguard the proper use of public funds, all right, let's say if you have to award a contract, so can you tell us more specifically as to what the penalties are going to be? Well, Chairman, for the penalties during the construction phase, if they are not able to meet the milestone requirement, so in other words, if there is slippage of works, and also in the operation, if they have exceeded the agreed thresholds or yardsticks, then we can fine them. For example, during the operating phase, and if they are not able to meet our environmental requirements, or if they have broken certain environmental laws, then in accordance with their performance, then we can deduct certain sums from their contract. So that's from the $70 million operating cost per year. Or will you be giving them the money upfront, and then you will ask them to refund you? Well, usually there would be deduction of the amount to be paid to them. So for the payable amount, we will try to deduct that amount, taking that as a fine. Let's say if they should be paid $70 million, then they would not be able to get $70 million if they break the contract. And then the EPD will be the regulator, right? Yes. Dong Kwok Hong, 4 minutes. All right, Chairman. So we have been scared once we have been bitten, because the chief executive has been involved in many businesses, and we have been kept in the dark. And last time I also asked this, well, for the CE and his wife, and also his in-laws, for the past 3 generations, have they been involved in such businesses? Have you checked with CY Leung, or is Paul Chen involved in such businesses? Have you done any checks at all? in order to avoid any possible conflict of interest. Have you done that, Bureau Director? Chairman, we do have a very stringent declaration of interest system in place for any public officers who are involved in this project. They will have to declare their interest, and in the bidding process or in the tendering process, we have not noticed such circumstances arising. All right, the chief executive is not a public officer. He's the chief executive, because last time at the LegCo, when we debated whether or not certain laws applicable to public officers and civil servants should be applied to him, well, some members said that the chief executive would not or should not do that. That's why those laws should not be applicable to them. Well, I'm sure, Wong Kim Sing, you would not have owned a company called UGL, right? You don't have any shares in UGL. You don't have any such company. You won't have a BVI company, which nobody in Hong Kong knows anything about. So you won't have any BVI company, right? Well, for accountability officials, of course, we do have a very clear declaration of interest system in place. All right, your chief executive, your boss has a BVI company, and yet you have no idea about anything about it. All right, you don't have any, but CY Leung does have one, and then I tried to ask or put the questions to him, asking whether or not he has evaded tax altogether, and then he said that well, Mr. Leung, everybody is doing that, and you don't know anything about economics. All right, we have been told that they have checked it with CY Leung, and there was nothing wrong. Of course, I have to trust him. Of course, I have to trust him. But then this is supposed to be a legislature monitoring the work of the executive. But then have you asked CY Leung, have you written to him asking if he might be involved or any company that he owns might be involved? In particular, does he own any company involved in anaerobic digestion? All right, this is a very costly facility, because even in the US it's very costly. All right, if he could have done it once, then he could have done it twice. So have you asked Mr. CY Leung, and why don't you give him a call? Because I'm not able to locate him. All right, during his election campaign, he gave me his phone number, but then now I can no longer reach him. So when I try to give him a call, I'm not able to reach him. He's not answering my calls. So if you have a chance to see him, then why don't you ask him? Chief Executive Mr. Leung tried to call you, but then he was not able to reach you. So within your BVI company, is it involved in anything that has to do with anaerobic digestion and so on? Have you checked it? And if you've asked him already, then I would be giving you my vote, or else I cannot trust you. Because I trust you, I cannot trust him. Because I've already asked you. You said that you didn't have any BVI company, but then have you asked him? Gary Fan, 2 minutes, third round. I'd like to ask about phase 1 of the OWTF with regard to sewage discharge volume. How much would that be? And also for the sewage treatment, would that be processed primarily before it's passed on to government's sewage treatment facility for further processing or treatment? Mr. Au, well, for the sewage quantity is about 200 cubic meter per day, and it will be pre-treated before going down the government drains, because it will have to meet certain standards before it's discharged into public sewers. So there would be pre-treatment so that it would be able to meet the standards before it can be discharged into public sewers. So how are you able to prevent the business sector from mixing it with some wastewater before it's transported to your facility? In fact, at source, as we have said, they would be required to sort the waste so that only appropriate food waste would be sent to the plant. And also within the facility, there would also be further screening and sorting. And within our plant, we should be able to deal with the sewage generated in the process, in particular after the anaerobic digestion process. So do you encourage the business sector to sort it as source? Would it be done by the administration, or would it be made a mandatory requirement? Well, we expect that at the facility there will be some pre-treatment. And then you refer to the treatment at source. Well, of course, for the wastewater, that will have to be separated from the food waste. It would not be collected in a food bucket. And if they are not doing it properly, then you will not allow that, right? We have given them the guidelines from early this year, so they are used to doing it already. In fact, in the catering industry, they already have the degreasing pool, so they don't. You don't have to worry about this because they already have a pool to filter the waste before it goes into the bucket. Next, KK phone. How many rounds? You're asking in the third round, 2 minutes. Yes, I'm aware of that. Thank you. Bureau Director. You intend to build 5 or 6 such facilities, and you intend to collect the waste from the business sector. Do you have plans to collect it from the residential district? And if so, when? I only have 2 minutes, so I'll be asking both questions in one go. And also, many of these centers will be developed by the government. Do you have plans to encourage private operators to do it, and then you can have a policy to help them collect the waste, and then in the end they can also process the food waste, and that will also save time for them to collect the waste in their operation? Well, under our plan, we're going to have 5 to 6 such facilities, and there should be sufficient capacity to deal with both commercial and domestic food waste. And the first plant will target the business sector. So for the residential area, that will come later. And then for the plants, there can be more private participation, including the eco park. That's entirely a private investment. So we would like to adopt a multi-pronged approach in dealing with this food waste problem. Well, according to the government's working figures, you have about 3,600 tons of food waste every day. And then according to what you said, you'll be able to save that by about 30%. That's about 1,000. And then with the facilities, you're able to reduce it by 1,500. How about the remaining 1,000? So would it come from domestic food waste or commercial food waste? Well, at present, about 1/3 would be from the business sector, 2/3 would be from domestic food waste, and according to best international practice, it's not possible to collect all food waste. It's not possible to process all food waste, and generally speaking, if you're able to deal with about 40-50%, it's already very good. Next, Wu Chi Wai, asking in the 4th round. 1 minute. Thank you. Can I ask the administration to answer the questions that I just asked? 1 minute, please. Thank you. Well, there are several aspects. First is about the superstructure. When compared to similar facilities, the cost is more or less the same. Second, about the building services. Well, these are basic facilities, including air conditioning, fire services, water pipes, or water discharge, lighting, and so on. So when compared to the backup facilities for anaerobic digesting, for example, the digesting pool and the treatment facility and so on, actually they are different. And thirdly, you also talk about landscaping and greening. Well, basically, we have to follow the EIA recommendation concerning landscaping and so on.
We are talking about rooftop greening, tree planting, so the facility can blend in with the environment. Thank you. Next one, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Second round, 3 minutes. Chairman, why don't you sing today? I'm not going to sing because I can't sing. I can't sing praises of the administration, and of course I can't sing as well as you do, Chairman. I was talking about Mr. C.Y. Leung, and I think, well, it's a waste of time talking about him. If he televises a message of 15 seconds to Hong Kong people, I think that will be all right. He's just like Osama bin Laden. He just likes to televise messages. But if he does it, I'm sure members who have questions about his integrity can now have a good sleep. Anyway, nonsense aside, if the CE does it, he will win votes. Secondly, I'd like to ask you this question. Just now you said that in Silho One, the mainland will put in a bid, right? That's what you said. In other words, people other than mainland and Hong Kong investors will not put in a bid. Is that right? Is that what you meant? Secretary, no, let me clarify. I was talking about local or overseas bids. Outside Hong Kong, you mean? Well, that is a mainland way of putting it. They also regard Hong Kong as outside the mainland. Are you talking about other jurisdictions? Mr. Chan, well, we are going to invite tenders from all over the world. We have received bids from different international conglomerates. Okay, are you going for the lowest bid? Or are you doing it otherwise? Chairman, actually, the same question or a similar question was asked last time, but we don't mind. We will repeat our answer. We have a technical and also a cost consideration. Okay, how do they relate? Because if people emigrate, there is a score table. So how do you do the scoring? We are going to have a 50-50% division for technical and cost bids. Okay, if that's the case. My question is, why do you go for a more expensive anaerobic digestion core technology? What was your consideration? Secretary, let me explain. This is not a particularly expensive technical solution. We have just identified a technology that is suited to the Hong Kong environment. Mr. Albert Chan, fourth round, 1 minute. Just now, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong mentioned C.Y. Leung and also C.H. Tong. C.H. Tong said that we should trust Mr. C.Y. Leung, but remember the cyber port. And in the end, the 4 biggest developers in Hong Kong were benefited. And also remember the SARS disaster. C.H. Tong was the one who presented C.Y. Leung to Xi Jinping. C.H. Tong accompanied Xi Jinping to the U.S. and he lobbied Xi Jinping on behalf of C.Y. Leung. How can we trust C.H. Tong anymore? Hong Kong will fall deeper into the ditch if we trust Mr. C.H. Tong. Okay, what is your question? I will ask the administration to ask the question I asked in my second round. The secretary said that you took the UK example, but in the UK there was only the use of public money. Is it that I only have 1 minute? Yes, because this is your fourth round. Chairman, we looked at the examples in different countries in Europe and also the US. In the recent years, they built dozens of such anaerobic digestion plants. In fact, many regions have adopted this building and operation kind of contract, and the government would fund it. Mr. Gary Fan, just 1 minute. I can't do it within 1 minute, but I'll hurry. You are talking about a design, build, and operate contract. The first period would be for 15 years. I'd like to know if the operation is not done well, if there is flouting of the operating contract. Now, if it has to be terminated, then would there be some kind of clauses regulating this? Chairman, The general clauses in the contract are, if they do not achieve the standard, we'll warn him and ask him to improve. And in the end, if he still doesn't improve to our satisfaction, then we will have different demands to be made on him. Exactly. I'm talking about how you can ask him to do better. Are you asking him to boost the treatment volume or lower the cost? I can't do it within a minute. Can I supply the answer later? Next, Mr. KK Fong. The fourth round, 1 minute. Chairman, I don't understand. Why is it that whenever I press the bell, I will be the first to speak? Because people are allowing you to jump the queue. Well, never mind. Don't waste my time. I'll follow up on what I asked just now. You agree that 1,000 tons still cannot be treated because internationally people only treat half the food waste. Would that 1,000 tons go to landfilling? Or Secretary, is it that you are going to deal with it in other ways? It's just that you did not put it in the paper. In other places, Chairman, if there is a food waste treatment policy, if you do it by anaerobic digesters, then you deal with about half of it, and the other half might not be able to be separated from other waste. But if there is an incinerator, then perhaps the food waste can also go to the incinerator. In Hong Kong, it depends how much we are going to invest in incineration and landfilling. That would be the objective condition for treating residual food waste. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, fifth round, 1 minute. Thank you. I'd like the administration to provide information. In food waste treatment, there are different ways to do it. We are talking about anaerobic treatment today, but we don't have papers to do a comparison. I'd like the administration to tell us the application of other technology and also cost estimates for our reference. And then in Japan, in Taiwan, it seems they are using refuse-derived fuel. That is now a quite mature technology. I'd like to ask whether this new facility also provides the latitude to use this kind of fuel rods for energy or electricity generation so that you can treat more food waste in the end. Please be quick, Mr. Au. Different treatment methods have been detailed in the annexes in the paper released in February. Composting, waste to energy, fish feed, or animal feed, all the pros and cons and the remarks are given in that paper. I won't go into the details, and may I ask the member to avail himself to that paper. As for refuse-derived fuel, this is one way to treat municipal solid waste, and this is also one of the options attending incineration. But in the end, some waste will still go to incineration. This is not a method to target food waste. And it depends whether there is any use for such refuse-derived fuel. I'm afraid in Hong Kong we don't have a lot of use for such fuel. Mr. Albert Chan, fifth round, 1 minute. Chairman, the Secretary asked the EPD to answer the question. However, at the last meeting, he said quite firmly that the entire design was based on the UK model. I was asking you, in UK, the entire facility was financed by private people, and you asked another person to answer the question today, talking about Europe. But you have to come clean. You have to be more honest. I'm criticizing you of your mode of working. You don't have the core thoughts about this. Why don't you also follow the UK costing example if you say the design is based on the UK model? Well, UK is one example. Recently, there is a policy research paper on anaerobic digestion, and it is said that food waste can be used to turn out biogas or to generate electricity. Thank you. That's the background. Next, Mr. KK Fong, fifth round. 1 minute. Chairman, thank you. I'd like to follow up on my own question. The Secretary said that the remaining 1,000 tons, and that is supposing you have 5 to 6 food waste treatment centers. And if you cannot reach that target, you will have to think of ways to do it. And the remaining 1,000 tons, you said that it might have to be incinerated together with other waste. In other words, and I suppose it's 8-9 years down the road, after you have had 5 to 6 such facilities, does it mean that no more food waste should go to landfills? Secretary? Chairman, I'd like to say that according to our food waste treatment plan, we should have 5 to 6 such facilities, and all in all, we'll be able to deal with over 1,000 tons, in other words, about half of the waste volume. But at the same time, we do not rule out making use of the recycling fund or the recycle or eco park in order to deal with the remaining part. And I can only tell you what we can do in the next 10 years. And I don't rule out that we have to look at the situation step by step. This is what we can see as a direction for the next 10 years. Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, third round, 2 minutes. Thank you. The Secretary said that there would be 50% consideration of the technical and cost bids. Could I ask you, what criteria do you go by? How do you consider the price bid, for example? What criteria do you use? Or guidelines? Do you have guidelines? Do you have a printed guide for us to look at? Mr. Chan, the assessment process is very strict, and our mechanism supplies a marking scheme. We have to look at the technical side and the pricing side, and then there will be a combined score. That is an established mechanism. Well, I know nothing about it, but can you explain to this council, or let us have sight of that guide? And also, can you do a longitudinal and latitudinal comparison for us? And how do you compare with other countries? Also, at your bureau, have you done something similar? Can you allow us to do a comparative analysis? Because I don't know whether you are consistent in your approach. Chairman, the marking scheme is open and transparent. Because the bidders would have to know it beforehand, and we are happy to provide the information. But basically, there are these aspects: their competence, track record, experience of construction, the operating experience, and the proposals, etc. What about the pricing side? Well, it takes up 50% of the overall score. No, how do you consider the price proposals? I was asking you whether there is any link between the two. Oh, never mind. Mr. Gary Fan, the 5th round. I'd like to give time to the administration to answer my previous question, and that is, under what circumstance can you terminate the contract for 15 years? For example, if they cannot turn the food waste into compost, and if part of it still has to go to landfills, will the operator be penalized? Mr. Au, last time we answered the same question. A small part of waste that cannot be anaerobically digested, that will go to the landfill, but that would be less than 10%, and that is the indicator in the contract. If this target is not reached, there would be demerit points deducted. So there is a demerit point system, and we can pay him less. But as to the termination of contract, it depends on the actual situation. No, I'm asking for the actual situation. Okay, you can deduct demerit points and you can fine him, but how can we terminate the contract? We follow the contract clauses. Mr. Albert Chan, the 6th round. I'm still talking about the UK model. You have thought about the technical side, but you never told us why in Hong Kong we cannot ask the private sector to maintain a self-sufficient operation. Why cannot Hong Kong do it? Is it that the Hong Kong private sector is more foolish than the UK counterpart? Secretary, well, we have to look at a few aspects. First, in the UK, they have a levy history. When the food waste is taken to the plant, to a landfill, or to an incinerator, there is this gate fee. But Hong Kong is in a different situation, and they also have different facilities taking care of the same waste. But in Hong Kong, we are starting from scratch when we talk about from waste to energy. So we cannot have a direct comparison. And looking at the Hong Kong situation, we should allow the first plant to be built by the government because we are talking about Hong Kong now. First of all, we do not have a levy by volume to tackle waste. And secondly, we want the infrastructure to be built according to strict standards. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong at the fourth round, first minute. Well said, Mr. Secretary. Now I understand you. You say the time-honored measure in the UK means that there is profit for business, so some people are happy to do it, but that is not happening in Hong Kong. So the government will like to give it a hand. Now I can understand it now. But my question for you is it the direction of the government that in the end we are going to follow the UK, that we provide advanced facilities or infrastructure and then the private sector will be brought in? Is that your intention? Secretary, Chairman, I think I answered the same question a few times, though it was asked by different members. Well, this is a kind of procurement, but we have an open mind as to the other facilities that will be built, and we can allow the private sector to take part to different extents. Mr. KK Fong, the sixth round. I like to combine the answers given to me by the Secretary and the Director. If you subject food waste to composting, it is bad for people living around it and even for the world. If a food waste will not be composted, that would be the ideal situation, and you told me 1 to 6 ways to deal with it. And you said that less than 10% would be landfilled. So is it that there will be food waste that will be landfilled, or is it your intention to try to minimize food waste going to the landfill so that in the end there will be zero landfilling? Secretary, when my colleague answered the question, it is said that if food waste goes to Siho Wan, then during the treatment process, there may be residues produced, and that should not exceed 10%, and in the end it will be landfilled. This is the basic regulation of such factories. And the facility now, we believe, will only be able to tackle 40 to 50% of the food waste, and that is more or less the same standard as in overseas countries. And I also said that we are going to start an analysis or research into zero landfilling for municipal waste, including food waste. And we are considering that after 10 years in the future. And in the end, we are going to minimize the necessity for landfilling of municipal waste. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, fifth round, 1 minute. Chairman, still on money. You said, okay, we are going to do this first, and then in the future, whether the private sector will be brought in, you said you keep an open mind. Okay, I understand you. If we look at it from this angle, then why is it that you don't go for tax concessions or tax rebates in order to hook the business sector? You have always done this. CH Tong did it for Cyberport. But still, I can't see any cyber research there. I only see residential buildings, and the science park has now been taken back. Do you want him to answer you? Oh, never mind.
Secretary, Chairman, our emphasis is that through this design, build and operate approach, we should be able to cater to the specific needs of Hong Kong, i.e. we want to be sure that we are efficient in our operation. Mr. Gary Fan, the sixth round. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Au, you haven't answered my question. We talked about the specific conditions in the contract. Let me ask this again. if they cannot handle the 200 tons of food waste or 7,000 tons of compost products. I mean, are these the specific conditions that you mentioned which mean that the contractor or the operator cannot continue with this operation? So these are the specific conditions that I mentioned. There will be marks deducted, and there will be withholding of payment, and so on. Well, that doesn't constitute a termination of contract. You do have a termination clause in your contract, yes? Right. What is it then? I don't have it with me. Perhaps I can supply that after the meeting. Well, he doesn't have it on hand, so perhaps he can give you the information later on. Mr. Albert Chen. I have other questions, but then since Mr. Gary Fan mentioned his point, then I would like to follow up. Well, let's look at the facility here. Well, the contract and the and you have to pay. Your question is, well, if you look at the OWTF, well, I don't think you should call it organic because the food waste may not be organic. So if the source is not organic, you can't use the term organic in your in the name of the facility. I think the term is misleading. So I think Mr. Gary Fan's point about the contract is very important. I think it should be under the supervision of the EBD. I think EBD also supervises the Tuen Mun incinerator facility. Sorry, I don't get what he's asking. Perhaps you can ask your question. Well, you have a problem with your IQ, Mr. Albert Chen, and Mr. Leung Kwok Hong sticks around. Well, it's all right if you don't understand what we're asking. We will try to explain to you with our greatest patience. Mr. Fan asked whether there is a termination clause, and you said that you didn't bring the information along. Now, I have to say to you seriously, we are about to vote on this project. You told us that you haven't got the information for us, and you're asking us to vote. So, how are you treating us here? Perhaps you can go out and make a call and then ask somebody to send you the information. Is it confidential information? If it is, well, then you can ask for instruction for that to be disclosed. But then, if you take time, it takes time to get the information. We can adjourn the meeting, and then you can get us the information. I don't find your approach acceptable. Dr. Kwok, okay, second round, 3 minutes. Chairman, I want to follow up on a question I raised earlier. This is a big sum of money. Is there any way to reduce the amount? And member also asked about the termination of contract. Well, if you have a way of terminating the contract, then that will instill public confidence into the public, because we can be sure that the tendering process is just and fair. And even if you don't have the information on hand, you must still answer us. We know that earlier on, there was a problem with the sewage treatment plant. Now we're talking about the first OWTF, and you can't give us confidence. You seem to be unclear about the escape clause in your contract. Well, I think we have been saying that the government is undisciplined. Well, you don't have fiscal discipline. And, well, if you can't give us the information or the paper now, should we postpone the voting? Secretary, the the colleague said that we are sure that there is a termination clause within the contract. But under what conditions should the contract be terminated? Then I think we must have the clause with us before we give you an answer. Dr. Kwok. Well, I think they are going too far, really, Chairman. You've looked at the contract so many times. You've already looked at the contract so many times. And you're telling us that you can't recall the wordings of the termination clause. I think it's basic fiscal discipline. Now you are seeking approval from the Finance Committee, and we're asking what safeguards are you having to ensure public funds are spent properly. And we're raising this question to protect the interest of the government and the public. So, well, without such information, do you think it's right that we should vote, continue to go on to vote? Now, for the various practices in Hong Kong, there should be a termination clause in the contract. Well, if you ask a project team, well, any project team will not be able to give you an exact answer or the exact wordings of the termination clause. Now, generally speaking, in contracts, if they say the party does not comply with the certain rules and regulations or laws, and then you fail to reach the prescribed targets for a long time. So these would be normally the conditions for terminating the contract. We don't want to mislead you because we don't have the document on hand. So it would be difficult for us to give you a detailed reply. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, 7th round. Chairman, I don't think you're right in your remarks. Well, you said categorically that there would not be any problem with the building of the XRL, and then you found subsequently that the rocks were too hard in your excavation, and then you found that the initial investigation report carried a mistake, and then you couldn't penalize anyone now. So if that was the case, how can we trust you? So what the MTRCL is accusing you now? Chairman, let me now invoke Article 39 of the Finance Committee procedure. I think we should adjourn the discussion. Please give us the information, or else we should adjourn the meeting. Well, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, we have already dealt with a similar motion, and the motion was negatived already. We did something similar in the meeting last week on relating to Rule 39. Now, if there isn't any substantive change in your motion, we can't do it a second time. Now, Mr. Gary Fan, I would also like to ask a question on the operating agreement. How does the government assess whether the profit level is right? It is not profiteering and so on. To prevent the operated profiteer, how would you assess the profit level? Are there any measures that we would put in place to prevent the operator profiteering? In our tender documents, we have a clear requirement in the design, build, and operating processes. They should put a price tag there, and then it's legally binding. And there is a fixed cost, and then also a variable cost. Well, the costs are legally binding, and we should be controlling the cost within that limit. We have a stringent supervisory mechanism. Mr. Albert Chan, 8th round. The secretary didn't understand my analogy with the Tuen Mun incinerator. The Tuen Mun incinerators is of a larger scale than the OWTF, and the operating cost is higher, and we have to pay $400 million to the operator each year to the operator. But then the project has been delayed. Well, it's always been a mystery why there is such a delay. So I'm using this Junmun example to respond to Mr. Gary Fan's point, i.e., how should we be considering the termination of contract, because there have been so many mistakes made in infrastructure projects and extra amounts in public funds have to be spent as a result. These sludge treatment plant is still being built and is still operating on a trial basis, and it's not formally sort of commenced operation. So the concerns there are different from what we're discussing now. Mr. Wu Chiwai, 6th round. We discussed the termination clause and also operation indicators and so on. We are about to end this session very soon. So perhaps can the administration spend, say, the next 10 minutes to get the relevant information, and then if we are to make a final decision of voting, then we have the information on hand. Mr. Chen, can you do that? Yes, we'll try. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, you are in the 8th round. Chairman, you set a very good example just now. You said because Rule 39 has been invoked once before, so it can't be invoked now. So I'm not going to argue with you on that. Mr. Wong, you've been in the business sector before. Would you say in a court, generally the contracts would be like that? Well, the court would dismiss your remarks. You must give us your contract sample. Well, please don't use that kind of attitude. Well, we're not talking about confidential information. What's the problem of showing it to us? You need our votes, right? And you must answer our questions. Many people are watching the televised broadcasting of this meeting. Mr. Wong, when you buy a flat, would you take a look at the contract, or you just rely on what the agent said? Mr. Gary Fan, the government said that during the public consultation on MSW charging, you would also be consulting the public on the OWTF. When is that consultation to be conducted? Secretary? Well, the government has once said that when you do public consultation on volume-based charging and MSW, you said that you would also cover the public's views on OWTF's charging. When will that consultation be done? What's your timetable? Thank you, Mr. Gary Fan, for your clarification, your question. The consultation on the undertaken by the Council on Sustainable Development has been completed, and we aim to forward the report to the Environment Bureau by the end of this year. And early next year, we hope to be able to present the recommendations to the EA panel at LegCo, and then we will be clarifying these issues there. What did you say? When? End of this year. We hope that in the first half of next year, we will be presenting the report to the LegCo. Mr. Albert Chan, 9th round. Chairman, I would like to raise a point again on the contract. The Junmun incinerator sludge treatment plant. Well, the problems arose during the construction of the plant. Well, the same for XRL, budget overrun for some several $billion. And all these problems have to do with the planning and also the tendering documents, and ultimately the taxpayers have to foot the bill, the overspending. So when it comes to the contract, would you be able to do something that the same problems won't occur again this time? Mr. Chen, for the OWTF Phase 1 and also the sludge treatment plant, the contracts do carry clauses saying that the government can fine the contractor if there is a delay. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, the 9th round. Thank you, Chairman. XRL, design, build, operate. This model is the same and is undertaken by the MTRCL. Well, perhaps not the design part. You are also adopting the same approach, design, build, and operate. Why do I ask you for a contract? For me to see. Now, if there is a problem with the design, then there will be problems with the building part. Would you then go back to take a look at the design diagrams? Well, Mr. Wong, you are from the architectural sector. Who is there to make sure that the three processes can align with each other? Second, now if the construction, well, Mr. Leung, you are in the 8th or 9th round, you just have 1 minute, and then you didn't give the time to the official to answer, and you are repeating your questions all the time, so this meeting will never end if you do it that way. Mr. Gary Fan, I would like to ask a question about tendering. In the tendering exercise, how many companies put in the bids? Are you just taking the lowest bid? Is this the approach you adopt? Mr. Au, we haven't finished with the tendering exercise. We have made an assessment of the tenders because before we announce the results of the tender, we can't give you more details. Not even the number of tenderers and whether you are awarding the bid to the lowest tenderer. No, not even that. Well, as I said, we are not just choosing the lowest bid. We have two considerations, so two parts, the cost and the technical side. We will take an overall picture, look at the overall picture. So were the tenderants given sufficient time to put together the bids? Yes, 5 months. That should be sufficient. Any question? Next round. Have you pressed your button, Mr. Albert Chan? 10th round. I want to follow up on the question on design. Well, the private company in the UK funds totally the project there. And the secretary said that it's something to, the situation is something, the situation in Hong Kong is something different. Well, why don't you follow the merits of the UK model? And you are just asking so much money from taxpayers in Hong Kong. We can leverage on the intelligence and the strengths of the private companies. Why don't you model entirely on the UK model? Is it the case that your subordinates are too lazy and you are just following part of the model and not the other part? Well, we should not then say highlighting the UK model because different countries have different practices and they have different levels of participation by the government. Let me cite an example of Singapore. Well, in the Singapore, for the OWTFs, in the early days, the government would take it on their own, would take the project up using the design, build, operate model, and then they open up the market later on for private participation. But what we are seeing in Hong Kong is we want to be prudent. We want to make sure that the quality of the project meets with Hong Kong's particular situation. Mr. Albert Chen, you've started asking this same question starting from the second round.
Well, he has been repeating his answer too, but then his answer may not be palatable to you. But then I'm just telling you how I feel, and it's already 5, and I've already got some 30 submissions on 37A. So are there any more, so that the secretary will be able to deal with them during the break? And if we have all asked our questions, then we can move on to 37A. Let's take a break of 10 minutes first.